Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Alrighty then. So today we're going to read a Gosho which is labeled The Recitation of the Expedient Means and Lifespan Chapters. It's an interesting Gosho written to the wife of one of Nichiren's followers. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, this was a direct response and advice to a woman's question about women's practice specifically. Of course, Buddhism is a practice for all sentient and insentient beings, so in a way sexuality has little to do with it. But since very early on in human evolution, I think it became pretty obvious that women have specific issues that men do not experience. So, I think you ladies will agree that men have been preoccupied with those differences throughout time. And men, as being a rather forceful lot, have pretty much rendered certain privations around women, personally and governmentally, certainly in organizations, around the behavior of women, much more stringent than to themselves. And I'm talking about things like childbirth and menstruation and those kind of things. So I bring that up not because I'm insensitive, but because that's what this Gosho deals with. This woman honestly asks if, as a woman and a Buddhist, she's practicing correctly. One of the reasons she asks is that that time and throughout most of human history, the idea of menstruation, let alone the amazing, unfathomable process of childbirth, have been at times intimidating and scary to men, and at other times simply discounted as impure. And anyway, so there were a lot of cultural privations that Shinto, for instance, took advantage of, and made privations on women that, in fact, women throughout history, in many practices, were kept from entering monasteries or holy places in general, let alone on those times of impure menstruation or sexual activity or foods. I mean, name a religion that doesn't have privations around food. All of these things are about impurities of some sort. And so this is an interesting Gosho for you ladies, but it's an interesting Gosho for all of us because Nichiren really explicitly lays out the practice of Lotus Sutra Buddhism. Now, I feel you need to also know that Nichiren isn't the one who invented the chanting of Myoho Renge Kyo. There's all kinds of records and discourse on this, written documentation that exists that goes certainly all the way back through Miaolo and Tendai, back in the 6th century China. And there's evidence that this was also discussed even in the days of Buddha or Shakyamuni Buddha himself. So Myoho Renge Kyo isn't Nichiren's invention. What the great advent of Nichiren Bodhisattva Nichiren was is his elucidation on the entirety of the practice being invoked and encapsulated in that set of characters, Myoho Renge Kyo. This is certainly the achievement, if you will, of Nichiren. So, anyway, all of that may come as a bit of a surprise to you. If you study broadly all of Buddhist Sutra, this will become obvious. It won't be a surprise. But many people who come to Lotus Sutra Buddhism come to it through organizations and groups that are, the first goal of an organization is the organization, after all. And what that generally means is a narrowing of scope. Because organizations are about control, unfortunately. So, Buddhism, especially in this age, is very much an independent, individual practice. And I'll just say this to bolster that. If you're familiar with Aristotle's teachings, ancient Greek, or any ancient teaching, you'll find that government, philosophically, begins with the individuals. In other words, to govern oneself is where good government begins. And government then grows from that in governing oneself, one then governs one's household. And as a group of people who govern themselves in their household, a community or a city, and you just keep growing from that to the state, and the entirety of the government is basically driven by individual governance, rather than what we see with the growth of fascism and other authoritarian regimes is an imposition by a set elite to impose rule on everybody else. Well, that's by its very nature is not governance. It's talked about as governance in our later age today, but it's actually just authoritarian dictatorship demanding certain behavior. And organizations, corporations, companies, whether it's a monastery or a company that you go to work to, is the same structure. It's an authoritarian structure, and they impose their will on the mass. That's not governance. All right? So Buddhism, very, very much the other way around. It's about the individual governing themselves. You're in charge of your own enlightenment. Nobody hands it to you. Just like you're in charge of your own Gohanzen. Nobody hands it to you. The idea that it has a special significance going through certain hands, that's all organizational, corporate, authoritarian. Has nothing to do with Buddhism. So, got that off my chest. But I think it's appropriate to talk about those things in light of this Go Show, and you'll see why as I read it. Hopefully this will answer many questions, and if it poses questions, please comment on it so I have an opportunity to help. Either you'll send me into research to be able to know what I'm talking about, or I'll already know some things that I can help you understand. In that way, this is our Sangha, this is our Buddhist practice, right? So, here we go. In the letter you sent me by messenger, you say that you used to recite one chapter of the Lotus Sutra every day, completing the entire sutra in the space of 28 days. But that now you read the Medicine King chapter once a day. You ask if you should simply read each chapter in turn as you were originally doing. Now the Medicine King chapter has a specific call to women, letting them know that they too can attain awakening, enlightenment, because even that was held back, as women have always been treated as inferior, right? Well, in Buddhism, that's knocked out the door. That's just, you're no different. You're different physically, human, but as far as your potential to enlightenment, it's already there, just like everyone else, and simply needs to be awakened. So, a lot of women, though, throughout Buddhist time, would read the Medicine King chapter and the Devadatta chapter, as there are specific sentences and mentions, and there are in others, but those two chapters really call out the women's ability to attain enlightenment, regardless of the fact that they're women. And so, as for the Lotus Sutra, one may recite the entire sutra of 28 chapters in 8 volumes every day. Or one may recite only one volume, or one chapter, or one verse, or one phrase, or one word, or one may simply chant the Daimoku, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, only once a day, or chant it only once in the course of a lifetime, or hear someone else chant it only once in a lifetime, and rejoice in the hearing, or rejoice in the hearing the voice of someone else, rejoice in the hearing, and so on in this manner to the 50th hearer. Now this is obviously, Nichiren is quoting sutra here. And if one were to be at the end, even if one's resolute mind and conviction were weak, and one's sense of rejoicing diluted, like the frailty of a child, or of 2 or 3, or the inability of a cow or horse to distinguish before from after, the blessings one would gain would be 100,000, 10,000 million times greater than those gained by persons of keen faculties and superior wisdom who study other sutras, persons such as Shariputra, Madhyalayana, Manjushri, and Maitreya, I will say that wrong, who had committed to memory the entire text of the various sutras. We find this mentioned in both the Lotus Sutra and the 60 volumes of commentary by Tindai and Miao Lo. Thus, the sutra states concerning these blessings, quote, even the Buddha wisdom could never finish calculating their extent, end quote. So, not even the wisdom of the Buddha can fathom the blessings such a person will obtain. The Buddha wisdom is so marvelous that it knows even the number of raindrops that fall in this major world system during a period, for instance, of 7 days, or twice 7 days. And yet, we read that the blessings acquired by one who recites no more than a single word of the Lotus Sutra are the one thing it cannot fathom. How, then, could ordinary people like ourselves, who have committed grave offenses possibly understand these blessings? However, it is now some 2,200 years since the Thus Come One's passing. For many years, the 5 impurities have flourished, and good deeds in any connection are rare. Though a person may do good, in the course of doing a single good deed, he accumulates 10 evil ones, so that in the end, for the sake of a small good, he commits great evil, and yet, in his heart, he prides himself on having practiced great good. Such are the times we live in. And I'm struck once again as I read Gosho, how similar our times today are to those of Nichiren's in the 13th century. Not much change, really. Moreover, you were born in the remote land of Japan, a tiny island country in the east separated by 200,000 ri of the mountains and seas from the country of the Thus Come One's birth, India. And you are a woman, burdened by the 5 obstacles and bound by the 3 obediences. How indescribably wonderful, therefore, that in spite of these hindrances you have been able to take resolute mind and conviction in the Lotus Sutra. Even the wise or the learned, such as those who have pored over all the sacred teachings propounded by the Buddha in the course of his lifetime, and who have mastered both the exoteric and esoteric doctrines, are these days abandoning the Lotus Sutra and instead reciting the Nembutsu, Amida Buddha, Amida, the chanting of Amida. What good karma you must have formed in the past, then, to have been born a person able to recite even so much as a verse or a phrase of the Lotus Sutra. So right away he turns all her fears on their head and says, did you realize how amazing your practice is? When I read over your letter, I felt as though my eyes were beholding something rarer than the Adambara flower. If you're not familiar with that flower, you can look it up, but the folklore of it is that it's a flower that only blossoms every 500 years. It may even be 5,000. Anyway, look it up. Something even scarcer than the one-eyed turtle encountering a floating log with a hollow in it that fits him exactly. That's from one of the fables, right? Moved to heartfelt admiration, I thought that I would like to add just one word or one expression of my own rejoicing, endeavoring in this way to enhance your merit. I fear, however, that as clouds darken the moon or as dust defiles a mirror, my brief and clumsy attempts at description will only serve to cloak and obscure the incomparably wonderful blessings you will receive, and the thought pains me. Quite an expression of humility, wouldn't you say? Yet, in response to your question, I could scarcely remain silent. Please understand that I'm merely joining my one drop to the rivers and the oceans, or adding my torch to the sun and the moon, hoping in this way to increase even slightly the volume of the water or the brilliance of the light. First of all, when it comes to the Lotus Sutra, you should understand that whether one recites all 8 volumes, or only one volume, one chapter, one verse, one phrase, or simply the daimoku, or title, the blessings are the same. It is like the water of the great ocean, a single drop of which contains water from all the countless streams and rivers, or like the wish-granting jewel which, though only a single jewel, can shower all kinds of treasures upon the wisher. And the same is true of 100, 1,000, 10,000, or 1,000,000 such drops of water or such jewels. A single character of the Lotus Sutra is like a drop of water or such a jewel, and the 100,000,000 characters are like 100,000,000 such drops or jewels. On the other hand, a single character of the other sutras, or the name of any of the various Buddhas, is like one drop of water of a particular stream or river, or like only one stone from a particular mountain or particular sea. One such drop does not contain the water of countless other streams and rivers, and one such stone does not possess the virtues that are inherent in innumerable other kinds of stones. Therefore, when it comes to the Lotus Sutra, it is praiseworthy to recite any chapter you have placed your trust in, whichever chapter that may be. Generally speaking, among all the sacred teachings of the Thus Come One, none has ever been known to contain falsehoods. Yet, when we consider the Buddhist teachings more deeply, we find that even among the Thus Come One's golden words there exist various categories, such as Mahayana and Hinayana, provisional and true teachings, and exoteric and esoteric doctrines. These distinctions arise from the sutras themselves, and accordingly, we find that they are roughly outlined in the commentaries of the various scholars and teachers. Once again, this is Nichiren showing the perfect practice of Buddhism, as Shakyamuni outlines. So you have to study all of it. He's not saying the other sutras aren't meaningful. He's saying that they have their proper place, and that knowing them is advantageous to understanding more profoundly the Lotus, which is the ultimate teaching. But that doesn't erase the other teachings. It just firmly places the correct order, right? You wouldn't want to learn calculus before you learned how to add and subtract numbers. It just doesn't make sense, correct? All right. To state the essence of the matter, among the doctrines propounded by Shakyamuni Buddha in the 50 or more years of his teaching life, those put forward in the first 40 or more years are of a questionable nature. He's not saying they're fake. He's saying that, let me go on, you understand. We can say so because the Buddha himself clearly stated in the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, quote, "In these more than 40 years, I have not yet revealed the truth," end quote. And in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha himself proclaims concerning its every word and phrase, quote, "Honestly discarding expedient means, I will preach only the unsurpassed way," end quote. So, Again, he's establishing the proper order. Moreover, many treasures Buddha sprang up from the earth to add his testimony, declaring, quote, "The Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, all that you, Shakyamuni Buddha, have expounded is the truth," end quote. And the Buddhas of the 10 directions all gathered at the assembly where the Lotus Sutra was being preached and extended their tongues to give further support to the assertion that not a single word of the Lotus Sutra is false. It was as though a great king, his consort, and his most venerable subjects had all, with one accord, given their word. So this is directly from the Lotus Sutra. Suppose that a man or a woman who has recited even a single word of the Lotus Sutra were to be dragged down by an unfathomably heavy karma of the 10 evil acts, the 5 cardinal sins, or the 4 major offenses, and fall into the evil paths. Even if the sun and moon should never again emerge from the east, even if the great earth itself should turn over, even if the tides of a great ocean should cease to ebb and flow, even if broken stones are made whole, and even if the waters of streams and rivers cease to flow into the ocean, no woman who believes in the Lotus Sutra could ever be dragged down by worldly faults and fall into the evil paths. So he's echoing the words of Shakyamuni himself, right? And the scholarship of all of Buddhism, that women have no less an ability to attain their Buddha nature, their Buddha mind. If a woman who believes in the Lotus Sutra should ever fall into the evil paths as a result of jealousy or ill temper or because of excessive greed, then the thus come one Shakyamuni, the Buddha many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions would immediately be guilty of breaking the vow they have upheld for the span of countless kalpas, never to tell a lie. Their offense would be even greater than the wild falsehoods and deceptions of Devadatta or the outrageous lies told by Kokalika. But how could such a thing ever happen? Thus, a person who embraces the Lotus Sutra is absolutely assured of its blessing. Do you see how he started that paragraph with, if a woman, and then he ends with, thus a person who embraces the Lotus Sutra? He's erasing this division. On the other hand, even if one does not commit a single evil deed throughout one's entire lifetime, and observes the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, the 10 precepts, the 10 good precepts, the 250 precepts, the 500 precepts, or countless numbers of precepts, even if one learns all the other sutras by heart, makes offerings to all other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and accumulates immeasurable merit, if one but fails to put one's resolute mind and conviction in the Lotus Sutra, or if one has a resolute mind and conviction in it, but considers that it ranks on the same level as the other sutras and the teachings of the other Buddhas, or if one recognizes its superiority but constantly engages in other religious disciplines, practicing the Lotus Sutra only from time to time, or if one associates on friendly terms with priests of the Nembutsu who do not believe in the Lotus Sutra but slander it, or if one thinks that those who insist the Lotus Sutra does not suit the people's capacity in the latter age are guilty of no fault, then all the merit of the countless good acts one has performed throughout one's life will suddenly vanish. Moreover, the blessings resulting from one's practice of the Lotus Sutra will for some time be obscured, and one will fall into the great citadel of the Avicii hell as surely as rain falls from the sky or rocks tumble down from the peaks into the valleys. So, obviously this has merit in its own, but understand as you study Buddhism that all of these precepts and so forth that he's referencing and all of these different ways of not recognizing the ultimate nature of the Lotus Sutra are actually descriptions of other sects, from Hinayana to Theravada to other Mahayana sects, Zen and Nembutsu and so on and so forth. He's just cleverly described them through their means of practice and why, in fact, they are inferior. Even if one has committed the 10 evil acts or the 5 cardinal sins, so long as one does not turn one's back on the Lotus Sutra, one will without doubt be reborn in the Pure Land and attain Buddhahood. On the other hand, We read in the sutra that even if one observes the precepts, embraces all the other sutras, and believes in the various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, if one fails to take resolute mind and conviction in the lotus, one is certain to fall into evil paths, because you don't fully understand the Buddha's teachings and their proper order. Limited though my ability may be, when I observe the situation in the world these days, it seems to me that the great majority of both lay believers and members of the clergy are guilty of slandering the correct teaching. So it's all over the place. Well, so is it today. But to return to your question, as I said before, though no chapter of the Lotus Sutra is negligible, among the entire 28 chapters, the Expedient Means chapter and the Lifespan chapter are particularly outstanding. So this is the 2nd and the 16th chapter, right? The remaining chapters are all, in a sense, the branches and leaves of these 2 chapters. Therefore, for your regular recitation, I recommend that you practice reading the prose section of the Expedient Means and the Lifespan chapters. In addition, it might be well if you wrote out separate copies of these sections. You know what he's referencing there, right? The chapters on the benefits of the preacher and so forth, where he repeatedly says, Shakyamuni Buddha, or the scholarship of Buddhism says, that to copy, recite, write, distribute, read, and so on. This is what he's referencing. The remaining 26 chapters are like the shadow that follows one's body, or the value inherent in a jewel. If you recite the Lifespan and Expedient Mean chapters, then the remaining chapters will naturally be included, even though you do not recite them. It is true that the Medicine King and the Devadatta chapters deal specifically with women's enlightenment of Buddhahood or rebirth in a pure land, but the Devadatta chapter is a branch and a leaf of the Expedient Means chapter, and the Medicine King chapter is a branch and a leaf of the Expedient Means and the Lifespan chapters. Therefore, you should regularly recite these chapters, the Expedient Means and Lifespan chapters. As for the remaining chapters, you may turn to them from time to time when you have a moment of leisure. And I think at that point, and I'm almost done, but there's enough for another video. So I'm going to stop here. I think we've covered a lot of ground. This is an exciting Gosho, I think. It's a very personal Gosho. So I hope that you take it personally as guidance for your own practice of Myoho Renge Kyo. And I thank you once again for participating and allowing me into your life. Please, if any questions or statements come to mind that you want to share with me, I truly appreciate them. Okay? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Until next time.